Do the picture of you, like looking at the camera with like the ghostly
Yes.
profile image of you hovering above it.
Okay, we're live now, so now everyone knows I'm going to have that now as a plan.
Okay.
So we've let the cat out of the bag. So we've started the live stream. We'll start
No one
in.
can see me.
Yeah, I'm going to change that.
So I am going to be in profile.
Yes, you are.
I could be looking at the back of my head.
But they can see the Amen banner, so that's good.
That's what's really important.
Yeah, it is.
I don't care if they're not looking at me the whole time. Back of my head.
So we'll start in a minute. Okay, guys, if we could,
As far as I'm concerned, we can stream it from a GoPro.
let's fill this table first, if we could. So we're going to be joined by the audience, at least the men that want to come from the chanting presentation. So they're finishing here in the next couple of minutes, but we want to be respectful of Father Stephen's time and make sure we get in a good Bible study. So there may be some people joining us here in a little bit, but we are live on YouTube, and we have this time an in-person Bible study. Again, as people join, I'll ask them to take a seat behind here, but we've been doing the story of Moses with Father Stephen DeYoung on a monthly basis. Usually these are on the third Thursday of each month. We made an exception this month because we're here at the Parish Life Conference, and Father Stephen has been good enough to do a late night Bible study. We're doing this much later than usual. It's 8:35
If you're on
p.m.
YouTube right now, you're faced with a difficult dilemma. Do you listen to me or do you listen to me?
That's right.
Because I'm live on two different channels right now.
2 Father Stephen DeYoung live YouTube streams. So you have your options. But thanks to those who will be joining us here for our Antiochian Men Bible study. We'll go ahead and start. Actually, we're right at 5 minutes after the hour, which is our now traditional start time, starting 5 minutes late. And as we get joined by others, I'll direct them in here to the room, but we should just go ahead and start. This will be going until about 10 p.m. here Eastern time. So Father Stephen, if you want to start, go right ahead.
So yeah, we're going to be picking up tonight in Leviticus chapter 16. We didn't leave off in chapter 15. So some catch up. Where we did leave off was chapter 11 last month, which will be posted soon for those of you who missed it. So you get caught up. But to sort of get us caught up a little bit, because what happened in chapter 11 is going to be mentioned right off the bat in the first verse of chapter 16. We read about first the dedication of the tabernacle and the glory of God coming and filling the tabernacle, the beginning of the services of worship in the tabernacle with the offering of incense at morning and evening, and getting ready for the beginning of sacrifices being offered there. And very soon after that consecration and the coming of the glory of God to fill the tabernacle, 2 of Aaron's sons, his 2 oldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, came to offer strange fire, and we talked about that last time, what exactly they were doing, the various aspects of it, none of them good. They ended up, fire came from before the Lord. They were on fire for the Lord briefly, and then were no more. And their bodies were carried out and buried. And so this, as we talked about last time, represented the fact that God now coming to dwell in the midst of his people, given that his people are sinful, was a serious and even a dangerous, potentially, thing. And so, as we said last time, much of the rest of the Torah and the commandments about purity, about cleanness and uncleanness, moral and ceremonial purity, even about how to deal with sin via sacrifice and other things. So we're going to see tonight at the Day of Atonement, chapter 16. Most of this is aimed at how do we allow God to dwell in the midst of his people his sinful people to dwell with God and not have things like this happen, right? Not have a sinful people end up being consumed by God's holiness. God doesn't want that. That's why God is giving these commandments and setting up these structures to maintain purity, cleanness in the camp, to continually purify the camp so that this will be safe, because he wants to dwell among them safely. Right? And so the sin and uncleanness of the people has to be managed. Has to be managed. And we talked about it a little last time. We're going to end up talking about it more tonight again. So we talk about the Day of Atonement. The New Testament sees this as this management system that is there to allow God to dwell among his people until the coming of the Messiah, until the coming of Jesus, until the coming of Christ. Right? At which point he will resolve the various issues that are being managed at this time. So that's kind of a lead into what we're going to be talking about tonight as we talk about atonement. But Nadab and Abihu are sort of this warning. Right? This is now a serious thing. And we talked about the sort of parallel in the book of Acts. Right after the Holy Spirit comes, we're approaching Pentecost here. Right after the Holy Spirit comes upon God's people, what happens in Acts? We have Ananias and Sapphira who die and their bodies are carried out. It's a lot of the same language as Nadab and Abihu, right? Because again, God dwelling among his people is this serious and even potentially dangerous thing still, right? Even in the New Covenant, St. Paul warns about, for example, receiving the Eucharist unworthily and how that can be dangerous, right? But we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's more about that if you go back and watch last month's, we'll talk more about that as we go forward. So all that said about Nadab and Abihu, unless anybody has any updates or schedule changes or anything else going on I should know about, we'll go ahead and pick up in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's two sons, when they offered strange fire before the Lord and died. So there's the summary. Now why do we have this summary? Well, as I mentioned, we left off in chapter 11. That's when Nadab and Abihu actually died. So what was in chapters 12 through 15? Well, I'll tell you roughly. What food you can and cannot eat, how to deal with a woman's uncleanness after she gives birth to a child, her purification, and then a bunch of other similar rules, right? So there's been a break. That's why we're getting this summary sentence here. We're sort of going back to the narrative now. We have this intervening set of commandments on several different topics. And as I said, the reason we're skipping a little bit as we go through is focus of this Bible study is the life of Moses. So we're kind of following the narrative portions. And I'll end up doing verse by verse and not too long in the whole counsel of God. So, yes, sir.
In those laws and that we kind of skipped over,
Yeah.
and the purification laws, some of these are concerning bodily discharge that
Yeah.
you wouldn't think were
Leprosy, yeah.
well,
Yeah.
other things
Yeah.
that were maybe unintentional or part of nature.
Yeah.
Why are those sins, and why do they have these cleansing laws?
They're not sins. So this is an important distinction that we've got to make in Leviticus. So I'm glad you asked that question. So unclean and sin are not the same thing. It's because there are two kinds of impurity in the Torah. There's ritual impurity and there's moral impurity. If you're morally impure, you're also ceremonially impure automatically. Right? So you murder someone, right? You're both, right? But it's possible to be ritually or ceremonially unclean without sinning. So, for example, you go and bury your father. You have to handle your father's dead body. That makes you unclean, right? That's not a sin. In fact, it's a good thing to go and care for your father's dead body, right? But it makes you unclean, and so you have to go through the process of being purified, right? Before you come and present yourself before the Lord again. And that involves washings, like literal washings.
Be in the camp or to be like to go into the tabernacle?
Well, it depends, right? The further you get in, the higher a level of purity you have to keep. Right? But so, I mean, there's going to be, we get in Deuteronomy, it's good to point out, when you go to the bathroom, relieve yourself, you're unclean, you need to clean yourself afterwards. But that's not a sin. Right? Everybody does that. But you do need to clean yourself. And we can all see why it would be disrespectful for you to not clean yourself after doing that and go anywhere near the tabernacle, right? Or anywhere near food that people are going to eat, right? And if you did go around food, that would make that food unclean for obvious reasons, right? So ceremonial uncleanness and like distinguishing between clean and unclean animals, right? Obviously, it's not that like chickens are somehow holy and vultures are somehow evil, like just not, or an owl is evil somehow, right? With animals, it's usually domesticated animals versus wild animals, for the most part, right? A lot of the split. But observing clean and unclean with these things and understanding hygiene is sort of a concrete way to communicate. I was going to say to Bronze Age people, but to us too, but to Bronze Age people about moral cleanness, right? Because important to what we're going to talk about tonight with the Day of Atonement is the idea that sin is not seen by the Torah. We tend to look at it as like you committed a crime. There's a law, you broke the law, right? And now you deserve to be punished for having broken the law. Right? But that's not how the Torah sees sin at all. The Torah sees sin, first of all, starting back with Cain. The first time the word sin appears in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 4. Not with Adam and Eve in the garden, eating the tree. The word sin never occurs there. The word sin first occurs with Cain, when God's talking to Cain. And God says, sin is crouching at your door. It wants to master you, you must master it. Right? So sin is like this force, right? Or this demonic being out in the world, right? That Cain needed to struggle with and wrestle with and beat. That's very different than the idea of breaking a rule, right? Like that's a different concept. And where sin goes, it leaves a mark. It leaves a mark and a taint on the physical world. And so to help people understand what, for example, repentance is. Right? Repentance is not feeling bad or saying, I'm sorry. Repentance is trying to fix it, right? Make restitution, right? What are you doing when you do these things? Well, you're cleaning things up, right? This gives a sort of concrete analogy. And it's an analogy we still use all the time, right? I mean, obviously baptism for the forgiveness of sins, community washing, right? Like we use that metaphor, right? But we still use that to understand Christ's blood purifying us, right? Washing us. I mean, right? These kind of ideas. So, number one, hygiene is good. It will help them live long and healthy lives in God's creation, right? On a practical level. But then beyond that, through those practices, God is teaching them something about sin, about ethical and moral living, right? And these greater topics. Right? So the one is sort of symbolic of the other. Yes, sir.
Where would you put something like the episode in Numbers where they went out to fight a God-ordained war, but then had to stay outside the camp for 7 days? You know, on the one hand, they were clearly obeying God because it says so.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, now you're outside the camp.
Right, right. Having shed blood, I mean, they shed the blood of their fellow human beings. So even though it was something God had commanded, it was something they were supposed to do and needed to do, right? That's still an act that leaves you unclean. And talk to any veteran, they've experienced that, right? They've experienced that. No matter how just and noble the cause was when they went to war, no matter, they don't come back feeling clean. And so having a process of purification before they came back and were sort of reintegrated into the camp, into the city, into regular life, right? That purification process was for them. And the same thing is true. One of the things that's in between was the purification of a woman after childbirth. That's not to say women are dirty, women giving birth is dirty or sinful somehow, right? It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that by virtue of being, especially at this point in medical history, people are going to get interesting view. Especially at this point in medical history, right? A woman in an advanced state of pregnancy is not going to be out and about and around other people, right? And when she gives birth, there's going to be what gets called in our prayers after childbirth damage to her inward parts, right? Being delicate, right? She's going to go through a lot of stuff. She's going to be separated from the community. At a certain point, she's going to rejoin the community. And so the purification rituals that have become now churching in our practice in churches are about her reintegration into the community life now after being apart from it for a period of time, right? And enacting that and making it real. So, but yeah, it's important to remember that there's not sort of some kind of, because people get this confused a lot. There's not something blameworthy or bad or sinful about something just because it's unclean and requires, right, purification, right? Although sin also requires purification, right? But they're not the same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. But so verse 1 is reminding us, or we're picking up back there, right? We're picking up after Nadab and Abihu have died. God now comes and speaks to Moses about it. Verse 2. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, in the presence of the mercy seat, on the ark of the testimony, lest he die, for I will be seen in the cloud above the mercy seat." So we got a couple things to cover here. First, this gives us another window into another thing that may have been wrong with what Nadab and Abihu did. For those keeping track, last time we saw they had strange fire, meaning they probably weren't using the right type of incense. We were told they were drunk, which may have been directly related. And now this implies that they also weren't showing up at the prescribed time. God had told them to come and offer incense with prayers at sunrise and at sunset. So based on this, we can say they also apparently came at the wrong time. So we can extract from this a basic principle that's basic to the Torah and the rest of the scriptures, which is God wants us to worship him the way he has told us he wants us to worship him. That worship is not about self-expression. It's not about us expressing how we feel about God or our own poetic abilities or our own, right? It's not, like a little kid making a figure painting and going and holding it up to their dad. Right? That's not what worship is like according to the scriptures, right? According to the Bible. God wants us to worship him the way he's asked us to worship him. And this just kind of makes sense. Right? We understand worship is making an offering a gift. Right? So like my anniversary was the end of last month. If I had shown up and said, honey, guess what I got you for your anniversary? A Makita cordless power drill. Right? She would not have been super excited. It's not because that's not a great power drill. It is a great power drill. But it would be pretty obvious to her that I bought her something I wanted, not something she wanted. That makes it, by definition, not a good gift. Not even really a gift at all. Right? If I love her and I want to give her a gift to show that I love her, I will get her what she wants. Right? I will give her what she wants. And so it just makes sense that if worship is us giving gifts to God, offering something to him out of love for him, we will give him what he wants. Right? Not what we want to do, not what we would enjoy doing, right? So this is a very clear principle. We don't get to just make things up. Right? And we have a lot of our Protestant friends who would agree with me about that. Who would say, yes, that's absolutely right. We should only worship God the way Scripture tells us to. They just want to ignore the Old Testament. Right? They don't, the whole thing about offering incense with prayers at sunrise and sunset that we do in Matins and Vespers. They say, well, that's Old Testament. It's like, well, God never said stop. God never said, I don't want that anymore. At least I haven't found that in the scriptures anymore. Right? Because there's places where I can take you in the New Testament and show you where God said that Christians don't need to be circumcised. Right? I can show you exactly where it says, here's where we don't do that anymore. I can show you in Hebrews where it says, we don't do the Day of Atonement ritual we're about to read about anymore because Christ fulfilled it, right? Christ took care of what it was doing, right? What it was managing, he took care of, right? I can show you that in the New Testament. I can't show you anywhere in the New Testament where it says, stop offering me incense at sunrise and sunset. So I'm glad when people who aren't necessarily Orthodox Christians agree with me about the principle here in Leviticus 16, but I think we need to follow it out, like maybe to the rest of Leviticus at least, I don't know, and maybe even Exodus and Numbers. Somebody have a question back?
I was just wondering if there was any particular reason they stopped offering incense.
Basically, it was literally kind of decided that only the New Testament counted. There's sort of a prevailing modern view in most Protestant circles that sort of, when you get to the New Testament, either when Christ ascended or sometimes after 70 AD, when the temple gets destroyed, because it's kind of hard to explain what the apostles were doing, still going to the temple. But at least by the temple being destroyed, it's sort of Christianity just started all over again. And so Christian worship was just a bunch of people getting together in a house and singing some songs and somebody preaching. And so there's the idea is that they think there's some kind of disconnect between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which, spoilers, eventually we'll do a New Testament person in this Bible study. I don't think that's there. I don't think there is any such division there. But, Yes, sir.
To that point, was it really not until the Protestant Reformation that's even an idea that you just kind of make your own thing up? Were there any early church examples that went away or were schismatic that were just like, you together in the house and preach? Did that exist?
Not really. There were some weird practices. I mean, there's Gnostic groups doing weird things and stuff. But there wasn't a real distinction. Like if you read Saint Irenaeus in the 2nd century, you read his Against Heresies, he doesn't make a distinction between like theological ideas and practices. Right? So it's not like he says, well, as long as you have the right theological ideas, you can kind of do whatever you want. As long as it doesn't contradict them, I guess. Nor does he say, by the way, that as long as you have the right practices, don't worry about the theology. Right? He kind of says, you got to have both of those right. Right? They have to be united. You have to have the right theological ideas and the right practices. Because the practices are going to be what really causes the people participating in those practices to believe what they believe. So if there's a disjunction between what you say you believe and what you practice, right, what people are going to actually believe is what you practice. And so both of those were considered to be equally a problem in the early church. So, and to be fair, at the time of the Protestant Reformation, it wasn't a free-for-all. They all had very firm ideas of what it was supposed to be. It was just a question of how much of this do we have to strip away, and no one agreed. Right? So your Lutherans and your Anglicans still have altars, for example, and then starting with the Calvinists, well, no, we don't have altars. Right? And so some will still have vestments, some will not, some will, right? So it's a question of how much of it do you get rid of to get back to the original church that you've reconstructed based on something, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's the first part here. We're still in verse 2. Who thought I was going to get through all of Leviticus tonight? Come on. Very key here. You can't just come in any time you want, right? God's told you the times He wants you to come and do this. He's told you how to do it. You need to come soberly, seriously, and do it at those times, right? And this is especially true, right? Notice it's not coming anytime behind the veil. Right, so this is what separates the most holy place or the Holy of Holies from the holy place. What separates the place where the Ark of the Covenant is at this point from the rest. Right, so as we're saying, the further in you go, the closer to the presence of God you go, the further into the presence of God you go, the more critically serious this is. Right, so going that deep in, Aaron the high priest, going in right to the Ark of the Covenant, that is the footstool of God's throne. This is the most dangerous thing he could do, the thing that requires the most purity from him before he does it, the most seriousness, right? And there's sort of these, we've talked about, there's sort of these concentric circles. So you have the most holy place, the holy place, the courtyard around the tabernacle, the camp in the wilderness, and then outside the camp. And the closer you are in, the higher a level of purity you have to maintain. So the regular run-of-the-mill Israelites are called to maintain a higher level of purity than the Gentiles. Right? Because the Gentiles aren't coming near God at this point. If they want to come near God, then they have to practice a higher level of purity, right? And then the priests have to practice a higher level than the regular Israelites, the high priest most of all, and particularly when he's going to go into them. the most holy place. So then there's this mercy seat thing, which is hysterical to me. But so the reason this is here is that the Orthodox Study Bible, even in the Old Testament, even though it follows the Greek of the Old Testament, it tries to maintain the language of the New King James Version, which is getting this mercy seat language from the King James Version. But that's a wildly weird translation of the word. So we have to talk for a second about the word atonement. So we're about to get into the Day of Atonement. In order to explain this, this is where we have to start. So the word atonement in English was invented to translate the Bible. It had no use before William Tyndale, it didn't exist before William Tyndale went to translate the Bible into English. And when he made it up, there was actually a hyphen between the T and the O. It was at-one-ment. So he made up this word, at-one-ment, to translate, he made it up to translate the Greek word that gets used in the New Testament and the Greek Old Testament here, which is elasterio. Elasterio. So he just made up this word at-one-ment. Right? So there's no etymology of the word atonement. It doesn't refer to anything else. Right? It's just, this is how we're going to translate this Greek word into English. That Greek translation is a translation of a series of verbs. So Hebrew words are all made from three consonants. So you have three consonants. You may know in Hebrew, you only write the consonants. And then depending on how it's vocalized, how it's pronounced, you can make it a verb, you can make it a noun, you can make it a participle. Right, but all of those words have the same three consonants. Okay. So in this case, those three consonants are roughly, very roughly, in English, K, F, and R. Right, roughly Kefir. Right, it's word by and more, but you know, that's close enough for English word. This is where Kippur and Yom Kippur comes from. Yom is the word for day. Kippur is one of the participle forms of this word, because you can take the letter that makes kind of a f sound and you can harden it. You can put what's called a dagesh in it, and it becomes p instead of f. But these Kefir words. Now these Kefir words all refer to wiping, smearing, or covering. Like when it's a verb, it's to wipe, to smear, to cover with something. Now we're going to see blood is going to get smeared around on things. Things are going to get covered with blood. So that is a very literal thing. Right? So that verb is used in noun form to describe the top piece of the Ark of the Covenant. Let me just throw this out to you, even as English speakers. If I take the verb to cover and I translate that, I switch that into a noun. What noun would that be? Cover. So all this is referring to is the cover of the Ark of the Covenant, i.e. the lid. Right? With the cherubim on it. Right. So it literally just says, the lid, the cover. The King James translators didn't know how to translate it. They didn't know what it meant. And so they did this whole rigmarole of, okay, well, this is the footstool of God's throne. So he kind of sits there. So it's kind of like a seat. and they're going to do the Day of Atonement thing, and then he's going to have mercy on them. So this is the mercy seat. And invented this weird thing that's now been handed down to us, even though we now know better hundreds of years later. So we joked at one point on the Lord Spirits podcast that people should go out and start mercy seat bands, play other bands' music, etc. Or just start a cover band called Mercy Seat. That might be enough. Just clever enough. But so that's what it's talking about. Everything it says about the mercy seat is talking about the cover, the lid, right, of the ark. So what God is saying here is that God is going to be seen. God is going to appear. So there's this cloud of glory that fills the tabernacle, right? But within that cloud, sort of theophanic glory cloud, God himself is going to be seen, right, above the lid, above the cover, right? So if this cover, if the ark is the footstool of his throne, right, this is what it means when it says he's going to appear. He's going to be seen above it, right? He's going to be seen enthroned there inside the cloud. Okay. So God is saying, we're going to see that this is going to happen on a particular day, that one day a year, God is going to appear physically, bodily, in the most holy place, in the tabernacle. And so the Day of Atonement ritual we're about to read about is all about preparing for and managing and dealing with that fact. That fact. This is of major importance because we've talked about a lot in this Bible. So both when we're going through the life of Abraham, all the times Abraham saw God and walked with him and talked with him and ate with him, right? And the times we've seen already with Moses, where Moses saw God, talked to him face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And then like 9 verses later, God said to him, "No one can see me and live." And you're like, going back 9 verses, wait a sec, face to face. Can't see me and live. And so we talked about how from at least around 500 BC, Jewish readers of the Hebrew Scriptures understood that there were at least 2 persons of God. There was this God, there was this Yahweh, who people saw, right? Who the patriarchs and the prophets saw physically. Right? Isaiah, Ezekiel see him enthroned in the temple. That's what this is talking about. Right? With the ark as his footstool. Right? And he eats with Abraham, right? All these things. And then there's God who you can't see and live. There's God who no one has seen. They understood this. And so when St. John, at the end of the prologue of his gospel, says something like, "No one has seen God at any time," but the unique, and I think what it actually says there originally was the unique God who is in the bosom of the Father has made him known, right? That would have been understandable to a Jewish audience. They would have said, oh, he's saying the Logos, the Word, Jesus is this God who they saw and talked to and walked with, right? And the Father is the God who you can't see and no one has seen. Right? So that would have clicked right away to them. Right? That means, and this is almost never taken into account when people start arguing about atonement in theological discussions, that Christ himself appearing in the tabernacle is what the Day of Atonement ritual is all about. Right? So Christ is involved with atonement in the Old Testament. People don't start there. They want to start with some argument about what's going on in the New Testament. They don't come back here. Right? But that's what happens on this day. On this day, God the Son, the Logos, appears bodily in the most holy place, visibly. And even seeing that, if this isn't handled correctly, Aaron can die. Aaron can die. Yes, sir.
The word you mentioned a bit ago, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's the Greek word
Yeah.
that's used for atonement. The translation, you said it was a bad one. Into English, it's.
Well, it's just atonement.
Just.
They made up the word atonement.
They made that word up. I just
Yeah.
used this the other day with an Islamic guy. That's what I'm trying to get straight.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not atonement, so what should I use?
Well, we don't have anything else to use in English,
Okay.
right? They had to just make up a new English word.
What would it be in Latin?
I have to look what Latin word they use. I don't have my books with me. See, if I was doing this from home like I usually do, I could just roll over and grab it.
And so in what verse is this word atonement?
Well, it's already there in what's translated as the mercy seat. So in verse 2,
So mercy seat is atonement?
it's the same word, yeah, that gets translated.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
Romanian, I'm comparing it in the.
Oh, okay.
Romanian Bible
Yeah.
At the same time, we don't have this. So that's interesting.
Oh, okay, there's no word.
No, we have a cleanser. The way I'm translating it is, you don't go into the holy place behind the veil in front of the curator or cleanser on top of
Okay.
the lid.
Yeah, so what they're actually going to translate the Hebrew instead of cover as like wipe or,
Yes.
right,
So
yeah,
that he doesn't die, because on top of this lid, I will show myself.
right, and then they do it lid, right?
Wow. And it doesn't say, mercy seat or anything like that.
Yeah.
In the Romanian Bible.
So whatever word they're using there for cleanser or
Yeah.
purifier, that's probably their
That
translation.
is.
Yeah, and so the Latin would probably be
But
the
that's a
related
curator.
cognate.
Yeah, they call that like a curator,
Yeah,
like someone who takes care of.
is that did you look up the Latin?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the,
What's the Latin word?
I have horrible Latin pronunciations, but it's expiato.
Expiator. okay.
Yeah.
So the ones who expiate, who removes.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
is that like the curator of the ark?
Well, no, that's translating the word really literally.
Yeah.
So they take the word that means to wipe or smear away, right, to wipe away, and saying like the wiper, the cleaner, the cleanser, right, the purifier,
So the way
instead of the cover.
the way I'm reading it, it says, don't go into this holy place behind the veil before this curator, the
Right.
person who cleans, comes to, clean the.
Right, but no, there's not another person who goes back.
Okay.
Aaron's the only one who's allowed to go back. So they're doing a very literal translation of the Hebrew verb into a noun, but instead of translating to cover as cover, they're translating to purify as purifier.
Well, I hope I'm understanding what you're saying. But
Yes.
So the word atonement was created to translate this word that was related to covering or wiping.
Yeah,
But like in modern English, atonement doesn't mean anything like that anymore. It means like reparations or,
yeah,
making good or making up.
making things at one again.
Which
That's the
seems
at
to
one
really
thing.
distort the original meaning of the word.
Yes,
Okay.
agreed. Yeah, no, that's gonna
Causes a lot of
be,
bad theology.
that's gonna be one of the things we're gonna see. Yes, that's one of the things we're going to see. Like the death knell of most quote unquote atonement theories is actually reading Leviticus 16. And what atonement is about according to the Bible.
Okay.
Right? Because if you just jump to the New Testament, right? And you just assume, when they're talking about atonement in the New Testament, it has nothing to do with the Day of Atonement. Even though Hebrews explicitly mentions some of the ritual and stuff, well, just ignore that, right? We won't go back to Leviticus, right? You can make it mean all kinds of things. You can have all kinds of fun arguments, right? But if you start here, this is where the concept is introduced in the Bible. right? Start here, you work your way forward, come up with something very different.
Right.
Which has been taught by the Orthodox Church for 2,000 years, but.
So what happens to so we change the covering of the ark from the mercy seat to the lid?
Yeah, the cover.
What, does that propagate changes to the meaning of the cherubim?
No,
Okay.
no, not yet, right? So what the mercy seat thing, or at one-ment, that comes from having made a decision about what it means, not from translating the word. Right? I've decided it means this, and so I'm going to put that back into here. Right? Rather than translating this and trying to derive the concept from this and then apply it later. Right? So I've talked about this before, the importance of when you're reading the Bible, reading it forwards. And that may seem obvious, but it's not obvious. People read it backwards mostly. And they'll try to justify reading it backwards. They'll say, oh, well, the New Testament explains the Old Testament. Right? And I'm like, okay, so do you read the book and then you read the interpretation of the book? Or do you just read the interpretation of the book and never bother reading the book? And think now you understand the book because you read the interpretation. Right? So yes, the New Testament gives us the correct interpretation of the Old Testament, but in order to understand that interpretation, we have to have read the book it's interpreting. Right? Like, if you just listened to my homilies and you ignored the Bible readings on Sunday, you never actually listen to the gospel reading. You just took my homilies. You could make my homilies mean all kinds of things. You could say I'm talking about all kinds of things. Right? But because it's in this context of I'm interpreting and applying this text I just read you, right? They go together, and so you get a coherent understanding of what I'm trying to say. I may still be wrong, but at least you understand what I'm trying to say. Whereas the New Testament isn't going to be wrong. That's the difference. But you have to read both. And when the New Testament is explicitly referring to details and quoting the Old Testament, they're kind of directing us back there. They're not just saying, oh, now you don't have to bother reading this because I just quoted you the important part. Right? They're directing us to go back there to understand something. Okay. So this one day a year, God is going to appear there. And we don't want Nadab and Abihu to happen again or anything like that. Right? So here's how we're going to deal with that. Thus, Aaron shall come into the holy place. So not the most holy place yet, but the holy place, with a young bull of the oxen as a sin offering, and a ram as a whole burnt offering. So first, as Hebrews says, right, Aaron, because Aaron's a sinner too, just because he's the high priest, that doesn't mean he's not a sinner. They didn't make him the high priest because he was the holiest person in Israel, right? He has to come and make sacrifice for himself. Right? So part of the purification, right, is that he has to be not just ceremonially purified. He's going to wash his hands and everything also, right? But he has to be also morally purified, right, because of the sins he's committed before he can come into the presence of God. Right? And so he's going to have to make these offerings for himself. Hebrews is going to make the point that this is one of the reasons why Christ's priesthood is greater, is that Christ was without sin, so he didn't have to make an offering for himself, the way Aaron did. So the ram is going to be a whole burnt offering, so the whole thing is going to be burnt and offered to God. And then the young bull is going to be a more traditional sin offering. So the best parts are going to be burnt and given to God. Certain parts are going to be eaten by Aaron and his family. And then other parts are going to be potentially distributed to the people. He shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with a linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments, therefore he shall wash his body in water and put them on. Right? So there's the ceremonial cleanness. There's the dealing with just uncleanness rather than sin. He washes himself, then he puts on clean vestments. Then he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering, and 1 ram as a whole burnt offering. Aaron shall offer the young bull as his sin offering to make atonement for himself and his house. Right, so again, it's the same word. So the same word is used here as a verb that was used as a noun and translated mercy seat. Right? So they don't, at least they don't do that here. At least they didn't say to make a mercy seat for himself and his house, because that would have been kind of ridiculous. But this is where the word at-one-ment or atonement comes in. Right? And so by translating it that way in English, they're telling you what they think it means. Right? And I'll say this. Here, you can make that work. Right? At-one-ment, right? Aaron has sinned. He's alienated from God in some sense, makes a sacrifice. Now he and God are at one again. Right, so here you can kind of make that work. But watch as we go forward how that word gets used. You shall take the 2 kids and present them before the Lord. Remember, these are kids like young goats, not like 2 kids who made too much noise during the service. You shall take the 2 kids and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of testimony. So these 2 kids, they're brought, the 2 goats, 2 young goats are brought up. He brings them before the entrance into the tabernacle. Okay, and sets them up. He's taking care of his own sins, his family sins. Now he's going to do this part. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 kids. 1 lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat. Okay, here we go again. Yes, sir.
Before we talk about the scapegoat,
Yeah.
pretty important part here.
Yeah.
I was just curious your opinion on this group of animals. Is this something that they had plenty of? Or was this something that was actually kind of a burden that had to produce?
Yeah.
and sacrifice?
So the bull and the ram, they did not have a lot of. Right. A young bull, especially, and a young ram. Right. These are important. Well, and when you're breeding domesticated animals like this, you have a lot more hens than roosters. Right. You have a lot more female sheep than male sheep. You have a lot more cows than bulls. Right. And so a young bull, a young ram, those are sort of especially valuable. Right. So the idea here is that, again, just like with when it's butchered and you offer the parts, right? You offer God the best, right? The most valuable. You don't offer him the leftovers, right? The remnants, what you have. And this is something that carries over, as we've said before, I'm sure in the Bible study, but this carries over to our time, our money, all the things we offer to God. Presently, we have the same temptation they did to offer God our leftovers, our leftover money, our leftover time, right? But the idea is God gets the first of the best, and then we get to enjoy, right, the rest, the leftovers. But this also, again, requires sort of like, I don't think we've talked about this that much recently, but the Sabbath, just the Sabbath day, let alone the Sabbath year, required a lot of trust in God. Right? Because if you're a subsistence farmer, which is what the Israelites were, and the Judahites were for most of their existence, right? What you grow Your crop yield is how many of your kids survived this year, right? And I mean, that's everything. It's literally a matter of survival. And so saying, you know what, I'm going to take a day off every week. It'll be fine. Let alone, I'm going to take a year off, which is why we know from later on that they never actually did that. God commanded them to, but they never did. That's a command to trust, right? To trust in God to provide. Right? And so when you're having to offer these young male, not the old bull who's gone to sea, right? Get rid of him, but a young bull who's going to be part of your next breeding, the next generation. You have to offer that. Again, that requires you to put a lot of trust in God, right, to provide. What if I only have two? What if something happens to the other one after I sacrifice this one to God?
And this idea of offering the best first to God has not gone the way of the old covenant. This is
Right.
still
Right.
true today.
And it requires the same trust from us, right? Why is it that we offer our leftover money to God instead of giving God his due first and living on the rest of it? We're worried we won't have enough for the rest of it, right? Same thing with time. I'm worried I'm not going to have enough time. And so I can't, right, give this time there. So it's the same kind of trust that's required, right, to follow through.
In this context, is there a religious difference between a sin offering and a burnt offering?
Well, the whole burnt offering is because they're burning the whole thing, whereas the sin offering, you only burn part and then the rest is eaten. So, yeah, that's and usually rams were used for whole burnt offerings because the meat wasn't great. Right? So you burn the whole thing. Whereas beef, everybody likes beef.
So the Israelites were really bad at actually doing this, right?
Yes.
As
we are.
Sabbath,
it should give us hope.
And so like that carries over to the New Testament as well, where Christ said, this you ought to have done. On top of that, you should have also shown justice and mercy and all these things. So especially like in America, where we don't, the Orthodox Church is not as well endowed as in the old country, where people have this idea of like, oh, the state will take care of the church, or the church will take care of me. I saw, the reason I bring this up is an article in support of tithing, showing like, no, in fact, like we're supposed to do it. And he was going back to the Old Testament. One of the prophets, I can't remember if it was Hosea or someone who said, like, basically God was telling the Israelites, try me. Like, if you are actually faithful and give the tithe and keep the Sabbath and the Jubilee year, then I'll give you so much abundance that your storehouses won't be able to hold it. So they never actually took him up on that, as far as we can tell.
No, we know they did. Because in Jeremiah, when Judah is going into exile, Jeremiah predicts that the exile will last 70 years because they had been in the land for 490 years and never celebrated the Sabbath year. So God said, you owe me 70 years. So you won't leave the land alone for 70 years? I'll make you leave it alone.
So we can do this
for 70 years, you'll be somewhere else, right? Yeah, so the land got to rest, for those years. Okay, so we've got the two goats. We cast lots, so we're going to identify one of these is the goat for Yahweh, and then what it says, the Hebrew is, the other one is the goat for Azazel. Now, there are lots of things you can do with the Hebrew, because the word Azel is the word for goat. So the word scapegoat in English, scape there is the same as escape, right? To get away, right? So they're wanting to translate the Oz at the beginning of Azazel as Azel is the goat, Oz is away. This is the goat that goes away. So one is for Yahweh and one is for the goat that goes away. You see the problem there in the parallel. There's Yahweh's goat and the goat that goes away's goat. Right? That parallel doesn't work. Right? And so from the earliest Jewish, I'm talking about pre-Christian Jewish interpretations. For the very earliest Jewish interpretations we have of this, they all treated that like a name. Right? One of these is a goat for Yahweh, one of them is a goat for Azazel, and Azazel is some kind of being. Right? Tip of the hat, a demonic being.
Where is that?
The scapegoat.
That's the word that's translated as scapegoat.
In verse 10.
In verse 8. And in verse 10, but yeah. But right now we're in verse 8, yeah. It's Azazel, right? The one for Azazel. Let's treat it as the name. A little later in Leviticus, not much later, a couple chapters later, God is going to say, you will no longer sacrifice to the goat spirits of the wilderness. It's Azel that's used in there, too. Right? So this is likely why those earliest Jewish interpretations are trying to do it in context. They're trying to say, well, Yahweh is a name for God, so Azazel must be a name for something. Right? And so based on those contextual things, they're saying this is this demonic spirit that's out there in the desert, that's out there in the wilderness. Right? Because this is what the wilderness represents. We talked about those concentric circles. Right? So not just outside the camp, but we're talking about like the Sinai desert. What lives in the Sinai desert? Not much. Right? Not much. Unless you're very close to a spring of water, just about nothing. Right? And humans couldn't live there. And so for early people, it doesn't matter in the ancient Near East what people were talking about, whether we're talking about the Egyptians, right? With the Egyptians are talking about the desert once you get away from the Nile, right? Or the Sinai desert, whether we're talking about the Israelites, whether we're talking about the Edomites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, any of these people. The desert is for them sort of the realm of death, right? Destruction. It's full of unclean animals, animals that either want to kill you or want to eat your corpse once you die, right? Like that's the animals that live out in the desert, right? Like there's nothing good out there. So this is sort of the realm of chaos, the realm of death, the realm of destruction, right? So what kind of spirits are going to be out there?
Donkey centaurs.
Yeah, donkey centaurs, yes. Evil ones, right? This is why we get to the New Testament. Christ goes out in the desert. Who does he run into there? Satan. Right? St. Anthony goes out into the desert. Who does he run into there? The demons. Right? The demons come for him. The early monastics, especially in the Egyptian desert, viewed going out into the desert as we're going out there to where the demons are to do battle. We're going to do spiritual warfare. We're going to go attack them where they live. Right? We're going to enter into this fully. Right? So that's the realm of the desert. This goes all the way back. Right? Here in the scriptures. Okay. So as we're going to see, maybe wondering, maybe going like, well, wait a minute. Are they going to sacrifice this goat to this Azazel? Spoilers, no. That goat is not going to get sacrificed to anybody. Right? Something else is going to happen to that goat. But that's, so one of these goats is for Yahweh, the God of Israel. The other one, they're going to, in some way, give or send to spirits of evil out in the wilderness.
Why did they have to conjecture about what was meant? Like, did they lose the understanding of it? Because you would think when the Torah was written, they would know what they mean by Azazel. But like,
well,
Jews,
yeah. So I'm speaking about this as a contemporary person. I would say that those earliest Jewish sources we have are right and are interpreting it correctly, right? But contemporary Jewish people do not read it that way. right? And so they would try, and they would argue that those sources are wrong. And, right, and most Christians today just don't know about it at all, one way or the other. They just read whatever's in their Bible. And if it says scapegoat, they say, okay, scapegoat, right. Like they don't see the name Azazel there, right? So it doesn't enter into
So like
into
that,
their thinking about it.
that verse 8 would be one lot for Yahweh and one for Azazel.
Right,
Okay.
right.
The demonic entity.
That's literally what it says, yeah.
Okay.
So verse 9, Aaron shall bring the kid on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. Okay, so that one, the one that's for Yahweh, the one that's for the God of Israel, they take and they sacrifice it to God as a sin offering. Okay, so that one gets sacrificed. Verse 10, but, notice this starts with a but. It starts with a but. This goat is not sacrificed. The kid on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat, or to Azazel, shall be presented alive before the Lord. It is not killed, to make atonement upon it. Now remember what we said about atonement kind of working when it was about Aaron. So we're going to present this goat alive to God, and somehow that's going to cause this goat and God to be at one. Doesn't work here.
Just covering work.
That doesn't work here. We will see. We will see. To let it go as the scapegoat into the desert. Right, so it is released into the desert. Right? What it literally says is let it go to Azazel into the desert. So it is sent out very much alive, right? Out to Azazel. Verse 11, then Aaron shall offer the young bull as his sin offering to make atonement for himself and his house. Thus he shall kill the young bull as his sin offering. Okay, so we just backed up, you may notice. Right? We just went back to what we already said. So now we're going to get more detailed instructions. So that was sort of the broad strokes. We're going to cast lots for the two goats. One's going to be a sin offering. The other one's going to be sent out into the desert. Now we're going to go back through and get more detail. So Aaron offers the young bull as his sin offering for himself and his family. Then verse 12, he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, with his hands full of the incense compound beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. Okay, so we've talked before about with censers, how censers worked. That there is an altar of incense in the holy place, not the most holy place, but the holy place. And that altar of incense, which is sort of concave in the middle, this is the place where the incense is offered at morning and evening. It's on this altar. And so the censer, sort of similar to our censers, they would take some of the burning incense and coal from the altar and put it into the censer, because then they could take the censer around and bring the smoke of the incense with them to take it somewhere. Right? So censers at this point were used not primarily for offering the incense, but for taking the incense offering and bringing it somewhere, right? To mobilize it. Verse 13, you shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat on the testimonies, lest he die. Right? So above the lid of the ark, that's where God's going to appear. So the first thing he has to do is set up this big cloud of incense so he won't see him directly. So there's this cloud between him and, right? So even though he's inside the veil, he's sort of using the smoke to create another veil, right? To protect him. This incense that's being offered to God. Right? So this incense, what is it doing? It's serving as a covering. Right? It's serving as a covering. So there's these deliberate plays on words here. Right? It's sort of covering the face of God there so he won't see it directly.
Oh, Steve.
Yes, sir.
What was the on the testimonies part? I don't know what that.
So the testimonies, the Ark of the Testimonies are the tablets, the 2 tablets that Moses received. Right? The Ark is the object, right? It's literally kind of a boat. The reason it's called an Ark. So the Ark of the Covenant is called the Ark of the Covenant. We talked about this way back in the life of David. It's actually patterned after an Egyptian thing. The Egyptians had these small ceremonial boats that they would put on actual boats and send down the Nile. And on these ceremonial boats, there would be these 2 winged goddesses, usually Isis and Nephthys, with their wings extended toward the middle. And then in the middle, there would be an idol of one of the gods. So Israel, having come out of Egypt, God tells them to make the Ark of the Covenant. There's a couple differences, right? Instead of goddesses with wings, you have cherubim with wings. And instead of an idol in the middle of a god, you have nothing. Right. Well, you have God himself seated enthroned, right? Who you usually don't see, right? Within the cloud. Yeah. Yeah. Right. But you don't have an idol. Right. And so when they would make processions with the ark, everyone could look and see the idol they're expecting to be there is not there. So it's sending this message about idolatry and about the true God every time someone sees it in context, because they would have been used to seeing the other ones in Egypt. Right. So yeah, and so now what's inside that sort of boat are the 2 tablets. Right. So that's why it's called the Ark of the Testimonies, plural here, because there's 2 tablets.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Then after he sends up the cloud, verse 14, he shall take some of the young bull's blood with his finger and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. Okay, so the east side, right, tabernacle actually faces west. So that's the front. It's the part facing him. The door to the tabernacle faces east. Right. So this is the front, the side toward him. Right, that he sprinkles the blood up. With his fingers. So the idea is he's collected the blood for the sacrifice in a bowl. Normally this was poured out at the base of the altar. So this is one of the unique parts of this particular ritual on this particular day, is that he's taken this bowl in with him, puts his finger in it, and then uses that to sprinkle. Now the word translated sprinkle there is also not clear. It's actually another cognate word from kepher, right? So it could mean smear, wipe, right? Sprinkle gives us the impression he's doing this, which it could be, or he could be like doing this 7 times, or just moving his hand that way 7 times and having it fly off right onto the, right? So it's not clear how exactly but he's using his finger 7 times to get this blood onto.
Regardless, the important aspect is the blood.
Yeah, yeah. After that, he shall kill the kid of the sin offering before the Lord on behalf of the people, and bring some of its blood inside the veil. Do with that blood as he did with the blood of the young bull, and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. So he shall make atonement in the holy place because of the impurities and injustices of the children of Israel for all their sins. And thus he shall do this in the tabernacle of testimony, built among them in the midst of their uncleanness. Okay. So we see the reframing of the problem there, right? It's in the midst of their uncleanness, there's this tabernacle of testimony.
It also changes the whole objective, because this was just about Aaron and his household.
Yeah.
Now,
And now the sin offering of the goat is for all the
children
people.
of Israel.
Yeah, for the whole camp. For the whole camp. Keep in mind also, this one day a year is in addition to the sin offerings that they're doing every day. They're doing sin offerings and peace offerings every day related to the sins of the people. So then why do they need to do this once a year? It's dealing with something different. Right? It's dealing with something different. Because the sin offerings have already dealt with forgiveness, reparations, right? Dealt with the sins themselves. Okay, but we'll see a little more as we go forward. Verse 17, there shall be no man in the tabernacle of testimony when he goes in to make atonement in the holy place, until he comes out, that he may make atonement for himself, his household, and all the congregation of the children of Israel. So he goes in there by himself. There's nobody else, even in the outer areas. Right? Everyone else stays out. Verse 18, then he shall go out to the altar before the Lord and make atonement upon it, and he shall take some of the blood of both the young bull and the kid and put it on the horns of the altar all around. So this is the altar of incense. So he's sort of working his way out now. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood upon it with his finger 7 times and cleanse and sanctify it because of the impurities of the children of Israel. Now notice the switch that just happened. Right? It said he was atoning for the sins of the people of Israel. Now what does it say he's atoning for? The altar. He's atoning for the altar because of the sins and impurities of Israel. This is important. He's atoning for an inanimate object. I would submit to you that inanimate object has not sinned. It does not need to be made at one with God again. Right? But something has happened to it because of the sins and impurities of Israel. And now it needs to be purified. So looking at the time, it looks like this is where we're going to end up having to wrap up, and we'll have to get into the scapegoat more next time. Right. But to finish up with this part, right? The sins and impurities, sins and uncleanness of Israel has left some kind of taint, some kind of stain, some kind of residue, something here on the altar where the incense is offered, on the Ark of the Covenant back in the most holy place, that needs to be purified, that needs to be wiped away with blood. And this is why we need this in addition to the regular system of sacrifices, the regular system of people making restitution to deal with sin. Because this is not dealing with the sin itself. This is not managing the sin itself. This is managing the uncleanness and impurity and taint and stain left in the world by sin, which goes sort of above and beyond, right? And so just as all of these objects that are in the tabernacle, we read about this when the tabernacle was dedicated, they were all purified with blood when they were first dedicated for use. They have to be sort of re-purified and rededicated once a year. And why does this start in the most holy place and work out? Well, because this is the place where it's the most dangerous. Right? You get outside the camp out in the wilderness, everything is cursed. Right? Everything is under the curse out there in the world. The Gentiles are under the curse. Everything's under the curse. Right? Outside of the camp at this point. The Israelites have been called upon to purify themselves at Mount Sinai and now to maintain a level of purity. closer you get in, the more dangerous any kind of taint or impurity becomes the presence of God. And so it's cleansed from the place where it's the most dangerous. If you really want to go down a nerdy rabbit trail, I've gone down this one. There's all kinds of journal articles you can read about how the taint got into the most holy place. There are people who think it flew there, like airborne. There are people who think it's like germ theory of sin, where it's like people came near it. And right? Like there's all kinds of theories. But regardless of that nerdy rabbit trail, right, the result is clear. The result is clear. Going all the way back to Adam, when he's expelled from paradise. Cursed is the ground because of you. Right? The ground, the dirt, the soil. Right? It's cursed because of you, because of what you've done. There are going to be effects in the material world. What are those effects in the earth, in the ground, in the soil? Thorns, thistles. By the sweat of Adam's brow, he has to bring forth food from the earth. Right? It's a result of the curse. Animals are now predatory on humans. Right? Sin has these effects on the world around us. So does holiness, by the way, when humans repent. This is why we have all these saints with animals. St. Jerome with his pet lion, St. Seraphim with his bear, right? His Russian bear, right? Their holiness and their repentance has an effect on the world around them. It makes these wild animals not hostile to them anymore. Right? Wild animals, according to very ancient church teaching and even pre-Christian Jewish teaching, the reason wild animals are predatory on humans is that they're scared of humans, because humans became violent and predatory. Right? You want a dog to attack you, back it into a corner. Scare it. Right? And so when a human becomes formed into the likeness of Christ, the animals aren't scared of him anymore. They're at peace. Last note. I'll answer questions, but last note before I stop talking. Go and it's like 2 verses. Go and read at some point tonight or in the next couple of days the beginning of St. Mark's Gospel and his account of Christ being tempted in the wilderness. And notice how it says that Jesus was out there with the wild animals. That's what he's getting at. Right? That curse wasn't on Christ. Right? And so next time, we'll pick up here. We'll do the rest of the Day Atonement. We'll talk more about the goat for Azazel, aka the scapegoat. We'll get into some applications in the New Testament and that kind of stuff, right, related to that, and flesh out this some more. But I think we've covered an important chunk of it tonight. So if we have any questions. Yes, sir.
While Aaron was in the holy place inside the veil doing this ritual, was he seeing and experiencing the theophanic voice?
Yes, the cloud, yes. Yeah.
Was he, think he was conversing? I mean, having a conversation?
We don't have anything to indicate that. In his case, Moses clearly went in and had conversations, but we don't have anything saying that Aaron was conversing.
So as he's making his way out of the tabernacle, I imagine it's pretty relieved he's coming out alive. Right? Yeah. Like he didn't make a mistake.
Well, and we know it,
especially after his 2 sons just got zapped.
It became a later custom for them to attach bells and things to the high priest before he went in there. So you'd hear it if he fell over.
I mean, think of the trust that Aaron had to have after his sons just got killed.
Yeah. And he said, and remember, his 2 younger sons were made priests right afterwards. So they were going in there and offering incense. That trust too in them, right? And in God. Those are the only 2 sons he had left.
Make sure you get that sprinkling right.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm thinking about what's been said, the death by holiness,
Yeah.
the presence of the Father. Did this apply to Christ as well, but just in like kind of certain circumstances? Because, we'd say Moses spoke face to face with Christ.
Right.
But didn't experience the death by holiness, but then it seems like in the atonement, and when Christ would be in there,
Right.
you could.
It potentially could. It potentially could. Now, St. Paul, this is what St. Paul means. St. Paul's going to talk about, for example, the veil of Christ's flesh. Right?
Yeah.
And that, so sort of his humanity in the incarnation was sort of protecting people from, right? The same way the veil blocked off the most holy place. It kept people from wandering in there.
And then does that have something to say about the reincarnated body as well? Because, we assume that's the same.
You mean resurrected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. We assume.
Don't want you to call it originist or something.
Sorry. We assume that's the same flesh, or is that some other?
It's going to be a different kind of flesh. Yeah. St. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 15. That there's different kind of flesh. There's one kind of flesh that animals have, another kind that humans have, another kind that angels have.
But that's why, we can still, some saints experience the resurrected Christ and they aren't killed by holiness.
Right.
It's still a veil for us more.
Right.
Human. Sorry.
Right. But that's also why when people see Christ, especially the Old Testament, like Isaiah sees him and isn't like, oh, this is beautiful and wonderful.
Well,
Right? Yeah, like he's terrified. Right? Suddenly he becomes aware of how sinful he is. And this is why when you see the icon of the Transfiguration, right? Peter, James, and John are flipping out. One guy's sandals flying off. And, right? They're like, ah! Right? And they knew Jesus. I mean, they ate with Jesus multiple times a day, right? They knew him well. They sat with him. They ate with him. And then that happens, and they're absolutely terrified, right? I think sometimes, wouldn't it be wonderful and beautiful to see that? It's like, it'd also be wrenching and frightening, right? Especially for those of us who aren't prepared for it, right? God is sort of merciful at only giving that kind of vision to people who are extremely prepared for it.
This is obviously happening well before there is a temple.
Yes.
And then could you walk us through the sacrificial process of the Jews, like in the temple era, and then once there's a temple, are there sacrificial practices that happen in local synagogues outside the temple, or was it centered only in the temple? Could you carry us forward, like from this time through Christ, when you had this practice played out?
So sacrifices were only supposed to be in the temple. That was the only place you were allowed to do services to Yahweh. Now, like the other things we were talking about earlier, the Bible's very clear that's not what actually happened. Right? That they were going and making offerings to Baal at different shrines and different places and different things. Even they set up shrines to Yahweh in other places that they weren't supposed to, like Jeroboam with the golden calves at Bethel and Dan and these kind of things, right? So there was one place where they were supposed to and allowed to offer sacrifices to God. They were only supposed to offer sacrifices to Yahweh, to the true God. But they did other things. But synagogues did not offer sacrifices.
Really technically stopped in 87.
Well,
the temple was destroyed.
Yeah, so mostly. Because there's this little thing that most people don't know about. There was another temple in Egypt outside of Alexandria that was shaped like a giant obelisk because it was a converted pagan temple to Bast. Then they turned into another temple to Yahweh. They offered incense there every day, and they offered sacrifices there once in a while. They weren't supposed to. They did, and that one was actually around until AD 73. So technically, for 3 years, that other temple in Alexandria was functioning. But then Caesar sent a note to the governor of Egypt saying, we had all this trouble with the Jews in Jerusalem. you got a lot of them in Alexandria too. You might want to do something about that. And so he went and destroyed that temple too. But so there were, again, there's supposed to, and there's what actually happened.
Just like I say, this is kind of flaky. I was watching some video, I should have been watching, but this lady, she was upset with her father because I guess he was a rabbi. And they had the kids standing out there and they cut like a chicken or something. She said he was doing it and they were putting the blood on the kids and they, and she was really upset about it. And I guess they were Orthodox, or I don't know, she didn't say ultra Orthodox, she was upset about her clothing she had to wear when she was a kid and all this kind of
That
stuff.
was probably some ultra Orthodox small group, because they're not allowed to do that.
Yeah,
The Samaritans still do animal sacrifices
probably the 70s.
on Mount Gerizim.
Probably the 70s and 80s, I just took it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of people doing stuff they're not supposed to do.
I don't practice Santeria.
I'm glad. Do you have a crystal ball? Anyway, that's a separate.
All right, well, we can probably bring this to an end. I want to thank Father Stephen DeYoung for his work. So we usually do these on the third Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. Eastern. How's July 18th looking for you? Think that should be all right?
No, that's when the clergy's supposed to be. I'll look afterward.
Okay, we'll send an email out. So if you were not copied on our newsletter, please sign up. Just go to antiochianmen.org, and we always send out the Zoom link, which usually doesn't change. It's usually the same link, usually. Sometimes we have to change it. But we'll tentatively plan on July the 18th. If that needs to change, I will make sure that goes out in an email. That email is really the only way to know if we're getting a change. You can also check our website. We typically post updates on the dates for these. We have 58 of these Bible studies now. They're all available in our Amen YouTube channel, except for the last one. I still have to post that. So my apologies for being late on the last
We're
one.
gonna be out of order.
We're going to be out of
We're gonna be
order,
confused.
but I'll adjust the playlist. We'll make sure that we get it fixed. But yeah, this has been good to do in person when we've had the opportunity, and appreciate Father Stephen staying up late with us 2 years in a row. Last year was a plane delay that was kind of the last minute audible, and we maintained the tradition this year. But we appreciate your time as always, Father, and thank you all for staying up late with us. There is a little comp line with an Ask Abuna Q&A that is actually starting now, if anyone would like to go over to where the chapel's set up. And then obviously we'll just refer to our schedules for tomorrow. The PLC will march on. So thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of the night.
They think it's good.
Okay, and the 18th is good. That'll be the next date. When's the symposium?
The week after.
Okay.
I was reading